modernize it and substantive changes, if any, like substantive issues, term limits or something. If somebody wants to talk about that, I'll try to think of all the issues I can so that you can have an opportunity to talk about it. And then just with charters, particularly Texas charters that in the past nearly always had a lot of references to Texas state laws. And in the 70s, they would still say, trying to be real helpful, we'll do this according to the tax law, Article 12-102. Well, they mend the laws every few years now, so they get out of date pretty quick. So now we change that to in accordance with state law. And you're going to hire a lawyer. You've got a professional staff that's going to tell you what that is. And so there's a whole lot of that kind of thing. Plus, there's just a lot of repetition. And we're going to kind of, I found a way, I hope, to kind of emphasize that to you. Where lawyers are kind of like teachers. We tell you what we're going to tell you, then we tell you, then we tell you what we've told you. Then we tell you again. And so Article 1 starts off, form of government. We want to have a city. We're going to be something called a council manager form of city. Well, when you say a council manager, there's a whole body of Texas law that explains that. You don't have to take several paragraphs trying to explain that because it's dynamic. A home rule city in Texas today is not what it was in the 1970s. It's not even what it was in the 1990s. The state legislature exercises more authority over you now than they once did. Probably not surprised. Similar to a lot of things. And that's...
You don't face that at all, do you?
Is it different in education? So we have that going on. And the idea is a city charter. Do you want your city charter to be the document that's probably pretty short and just says, in these areas where a local majority still has the authority to be different than the big majority, here's what you can do. You can have council manager form of government. You can have strong mayor form of government. You can have 5 people on your council. You can have 7 on your council. But you can't change the basic nature of a home rule city. So there's a whole lot that's in here that needed to be in here in the 1970s, and some of it needed to be here in the 1990s. But really, your lawyer and your staff just has to ignore paragraphs of this because they better not follow it because that's just not the real thing. And even when you know what you're doing, that's kind of confusing. And then that thing about, well, we want to start off and say, what kind of a city are we? Then we want to set out the powers of the city. Then we're going to have an article. Article 3 is the powers of the city council. And then Article 4 is the powers of the city hired staff. You can see we're going to be saying, I've already said the same thing about 3 times. Because the council doesn't do stuff. They set policy. They make decisions. They don't decide how to do something. They don't create a budget. Now, they may sit in and they probably give you a lot of direction on what they want that budget to be. But your staff creates a draft, like we're creating a draft of this, and then a decision maker decides. So in going through this now, my approach is I think less is maybe more, so to speak. And so there's a lot of deletions where we're taking things out. And then, so we already talked through this at the last meeting. We talked about powers of the city, then we talked about powers of the city council. Tonight, we're going to specifically talk about powers of the city staff, which in a council manager form of government, really most of the talking needs to be about the powers of the city manager. Because your charter talks about the police chief and the fire chief and the fire marshal and the finance director. And, well, those are all employees. They're city employees, but they're all hired by the city manager with the approval of the council. But, you know, the council has to approve everything. So do we need to, in every paragraph, say the city has this power, the city council is going to approve everything the city staff does, and the city staff is the city manager, and the city manager can hire a staff? Or do we need to say the city manager can hire a staff, which includes a police chief? And we want to have a police department, and we want to pay our employees. Well, in the 1970s and the 1950s and the 1940s, you needed to set out a lot of specifics because Texas law wasn't near as complicated as it is now. Nowadays, it just gets in the way. So as we talk through that, the document you're looking at, if we start with Article 1, that's the purpose of Article 1. It's just saying we want to have a home rule city. In Texas, the Constitution says if you have 5,000 people living in one place and you have an election and a majority of you want to be home rule, you're good. You got to create a charter. You did. So then we talk about the form of government, council manager. Now, there is room for gray areas in council manager, but the purpose of this charter is to say what you want that to be, not to create more gray areas, kind of. So, and then the next part, we talk about the city limits and boundaries. The power of Texas cities has been, in the past, cities really had a lot of authority to annex. Now, annexation is a very constricted, limited, very difficult thing for a city to do. So we talk about annexation, but instead of a page or two saying how we do it, there's a sentence or two that says, we, by golly, will follow whatever the state law tells us to do. So keep going, and pretty soon we get to, there's a reference in that Article 1 about industrial districts. That's a type of old, 30-year-old economic development type of thing. We still have industrial districts in Texas, but there's a whole body of state law now that tells you how to do it. You don't need a city charter to tell you how to do it. So we're taking that. So we get to Article 2, powers of the city. So now there's a lot of general statements. Section 2.01, that first paragraph there on page 7, City of White House shall have all the powers now or hereafter granted to home rule municipalities by the Constitution and laws and not specifically prohibited, together with all the implied powers necessary. You got it. Actually, in my opinion, that's probably enough. That says whatever the home rule authority is, you got it. That's what we want. Now, what does that mean? I can explain that. Leslie can explain that to you over the next 6 hours because there's a lot of detail. But we don't actually need that. So this is kind of good. It says, well, let me tell you some examples. You can have a corporate seal because you're the municipal corporation. So I don't mean to be making fun of the city secretary who actually uses a seal. Cities do legal documents. You need a seal. But whether you say that in your charter or not, she's going to have one. And there's a state law that says how she goes about doing that and what it's going to look like and that kind of thing. So there's quite a few things still in here, but in reality, from my perspective, I'm already letting you leave in a couple of pages that you don't really need. And when I was a young lawyer, I wanted to be very specific, and I wanted to point out, you can't do this, you need to do this. I wanted to be real helpful. As I practiced law, I realized, the more advice I put into writing, like this example now where I just keep talking, I'm actually kind of complicating it. If I just say, we have a council manager form of government, so the city council sets all the policy, they make all the money decisions, they set the taxes, they set the fines, they have indirect and direct input to the city manager. If the city manager doesn't run the city the way they want, they can change that. But then after that, really the city manager is supposed to be the CEO of the corporation. The home rule cities in Texas are based on the idea of making government run like a business. That's a Texas idea that came out now 1.5 centuries ago. And it's now been taken over by the whole U.S. And we're the ones that actually still kind of practice it. So we keep going through that too. There's references to streets, to street development. You know, if you're going to have a city, once upon a time, it was real important to say we want to have streets. We want to pave streets, because when Texas cities first got started in the 1830s and the 1860s, the counties did the streets, or the people who lived on the street made their own. So we keep going through that, and then if you get to page 9, and I apologize to you for using that blue color. I know it's really hard to read. I wanted to use a color that would kind of jump out at you. So everything you see in blue over the next several pages are general powers of the city that are currently in Article 11. That's called other provisions. So everything that's in blue is kind of already in Article 2 and Article 3, but it's also in Article 11. So, but since the last meeting, as I was thinking through that, it bothered me. I should have had all of this for the last meeting. I went to Article 11 and I've moved, or all this blue is I'm recommending that you just take all that wording from Article 11, other provisions. Like, I want to tell you one more time what power you have. And let's just put it up here where we're saying it for the first time. So that's what I've done. And I left it all in blue because we want to compare, your city staff and I, and you're welcome to if you want to. Over the next week, we're going to compare the blue to all the rest that's just in white in Article 2. And I think we'll just say it once. We'll pick the wording where it's the best. It may be the best in Article 2 now, or it may be the best in Article 11. But unless you think about it and say, no, don't do that, that's what I'm suggesting to the staff that we do this week, is we just pick the best wording and just say it once. And so you see there's 1, 2, 3 pages. I'm suggesting it's duplication. Some of it's triplication. I'm not even sure that's a word, but it is in charts. So now we get to Article 3. And I know you know this, but interrupt me anytime with a question. You know? When you have the thought, go ahead. Article 3, now we're talking about powers of the city council. So again, I want to make sure you understand. We create the city, and then we're talking about powers of the city. Well, Article 2, the purpose of Article 2 is to say whatever the powers of the city are, which is all the powers a home rule city in Texas has, then the council's the final decision. Everything. Even though you're a council manager form of government, the city manager isn't the boss king. The city manager is the CEO. The council is the board of directors, and they hire. The idea is I'm not criticizing the council. I'm saying we elect citizens who either have the time or the money or the interest to volunteer or maybe get paid a little bit to make decisions. As a city gets bigger, and once you get that 5,000 threshold and you become home rule, we start the process of you stop having the council do things and you start hiring a professional staff. That's the whole idea. No offense to the elected council, but the whole idea is to hire this professional staff. So the city exercises all of its authority through the city council, but the city council actually does very little of the actual day-to-day moving of paper. When they meet, they vote, and their vote, they might have a meeting and they might spend $500,000 in that meeting. But then that's 25, 30 contracts, that's 10 employees, all that means a lot of work for the city manager. And so we don't need to go into detail to say that anymore. So Article 3 powers, and we start off with how many we're going to have. Are you going to elect them? You have the ability to elect your council at large. That's what y'all do. You elect them at large, but you have a place. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And so that you do that so that you can stagger the terms, so that you have 2-year terms, but everybody doesn't leave the same year. And despite our planning to do that, circumstances happen. People move, people quit, and so sometimes you do have an election for more than 1 or 2 per each year. Then we go to qualifications. We kind of got stuck on this last time because White House's qualifications are about twice as many as the trend and probably most city councils now. So I went back and got a second and a third opinion from other city attorneys and read a couple of other charters. Your staff got several charters that they've read, and if you want to do a little research on your own, they've already got those and we can send them to you. So if you look on page 12, you can see that there's a section 3.02 that I've lined through. So we start off kind of negative. 302 says nobody elected to the council can have another office. So you have a whole separate paragraph saying that. So clearly, politically, that was important in the 1990s. And it may still be, and if it is, we will leave that untouched. But you don't need it there because this is the first of 3 times where you say that in the next 2 pages. And so you don't, unless you really want to make a statement, you don't need to say it that much. So I suggested just take all that out, and then let's just move on to 303, and let's talk about qualifications and disqualifications. So qualified, all the 5 council members and mayor shall have the following. And I think it's a good idea that you have the same rules for mayor and council. Some cities say, well, we want you to be a resident of the city for a year or 2 years or 3 years to be mayor, but 6 months or a year to be council. And I'm suggesting just the trend is if somebody can live here for 6 months and get the most votes, what's wrong? And the courts, the trends are to try to make it easier for people to be able to register, easier to vote, and easier for people to be candidates. And White House's charter has a few places in here that reflect the 1970s where we were still we didn't mind having a few obstacles to those kind of things. So we probably want to take more of those. This is a good opportunity to take those out. And then the first thing you say is be a citizen of the U.S. Nothing wrong with being a citizen of the U.S., but look, the next thing is be a qualified voter of Texas. So I thought about that a minute and I thought, if I'm not a citizen of the United States, can I be a qualified voter in Texas? Isn't Texas part of the United States? So I don't want to start a revolution. I'm not trying to make a political statement. I just don't think you need to say be a citizen of the U.S. I am a citizen of the U.S. I am thankful I am. But I'm also a Texas voter, and I'm pretty proud of that. And if I'm a Texas voter, I didn't get my voter registration without being a citizen. So, for instance, if you said on election day, I want a copy of your birth certificate to prove you're a citizen and a copy of your Texas driver's license, and if I was a lawyer, I could sue you and say, you're just making me prove the same thing twice, and I would win. And it's not worth it. You just waste some money doing that. So I went ahead and drew a line through it. Now, if you or the council says, well, by golly, we're not going to, then I'll take it out. I'm just saying you don't need it. I do like the idea of being a qualified voter. Virtually every city in Texas that I know of says that, because why would you want to elect a non-voter? And then it says at least 21 years of age. Okay, just a minute. You got to be a qualified voter of the state of Texas. But I don't care what the legislature said about what you have to do to be a qualified voter. You need to also be a qualified voter and at least 21 years old.
Yeah, we got hung up on that age last time.
So, as a lawyer who's spent my entire career defending cities, if Texas in the United States says you can vote at 18, you can still say 21 years. You can hire me and I will defend you with a straight face, and I will take your money and smile, and I will argue to the federal or state judge and say, we just want to we want maturity. Come on, man. And I'm going to lose. But so I just take it out. But I'm not trying to make a political statement.
Well,
I'm trying to make a money statement.
That was the comments, those are the comments that kind of swirled last time was, we don't care if it's 18 or 20. Like, 18 is fine because you can defend your country. Why can't you,
Okay.
be a council person? I think that was the consensus between, at least me and Cassie. Froncel didn't really chime in that much on that specific topic, I don't believe. I can't recall. But
Okay.
I felt like that was, I don't know what you guys think.
Age of 18, you're technically legally an adult by law, so I consider that comes into play. Kind of playing into the whole each of the country, there are kids that
No, not
18.
personally.
18 is probably the happy medium because you're going to graduate high school and sort of like what we have with our youth community council, where the council of those to pursue local government, that they can potentially. I think that's perfect.
So I'm going to go ahead and cross out the 21. All right. Then we say reside in the city limits on election day. That's very standard. You can still get away with that. And have resided within the corporate limits. So that's one thing. Live here on election day for the job. If you want to be on the city council or be the mayor, you need to live in that. You need to be a voter in Texas and a voter here. But then the next thing is, and have resided within the corporate limits for at least a year. Because now this is a sneaky way to go back to add a requirement to being a registered voter. And so that's kind of maybe what we were doing in the 1970s, but we can't get away with that now. So a year is probably still good. In 5 years or 6 or 7, when you review this again, I don't think it will be. I think it's just a lawsuit waiting. 6 months, there's got to be some time there. So 6 months is becoming a more common date, but you can still leave it at 1 year, and I don't think you'll get sued in the next 5 years.
Yeah, I think 1 year is fine, but I also can see someone saying, well, I have a 6-month lease. Like, if people are able to lease an apartment here for 6 months.
It's a good point.
Yeah.
I hadn't thought of it.
Well, and I think too, I could see an instance where somebody who's really involved in the community may have lived right outside the city limits and then moves in, running and winning. I mean, I can think of an example or two off the top of my head where that would be plausible.
It's all swirling with that thing of some cities say in order to serve, in the council, you have these qualifications, in order to serve on one of our boards, even bigger towns, they say you have to live in our city. Well, we now have like the Metroplex. There's 20 cities. So it creates issues. Mm-hmm. And so what you have is, this is still a common provision, but it's just not enforced. And if you do enforce it, you're kind of either cutting your nose off to have that person who, if your council will appoint somebody, or if somebody wants to run for your council, might get a lot of votes. So
I can tell you how we would handle it as a staff, as long as I'm here, is that we would let them file for a place on the ballot and would tell anybody opposed to it, you need to go to court and get an injunction. That's between y'all. Our job is to take the application for a place on the ballot and y'all will figure it out.
So the next one, and I've lined through this, and this is probably going to be controversial because not have been employed by the city of White House within the last X number of years. So this is clearly an obstacle and a prohibition to offering yourselves as a candidate. There could be a lot of financial and political reasons why I know why a city would do something like that. But this is a direct barrier to political participation. So I sound like I'm a plaintiff's lawyer. That's because I'm an experienced defense lawyer. So I think like a plaintiff's lawyer. You can keep this in there, and it may not be politically worth arguing with, but I'm just saying, if you're ever seriously challenged on that and you get a competent plaintiff's lawyer, this is one where you would want to make sure you have a very good defense firm, because you'll probably lose.
I don't understand what the where 5 years came from.
Well, the catch is, as a lawyer who would try to defend that, I probably wouldn't want you to know why we picked 5, because I could probably tell you who it was.
Right, but I mean, in general, right? I get
It's not accurate.
I get it, in general.
There's not that much difference between what cities do.
So, I mean, would there be a way to shorten this with like still protecting some of what the city was trying to do there?
Anything less than 5 is more defensible. But anything you put up, just understand, you're doing it for good business, for good reasons, I'm saying that. But the person who doesn't like that will say it is a barrier to political participation. And every judge will agree with it. Whether or not the judge will allow you to do that under your home rule authority, 1970s, I'm confident I would have won that. Today, I probably wouldn't take your case.
Is it looked at as an advantage to work for 5 years and hop off and run?
Well, I think what happens here is you don't want a disgruntled employee running for the council, because I'm familiar with that situation.
Sure.
That happens all over Texas. It's not a secret. That's just
No,
like
the school
common.
boards, yeah, for sure.
Might happen with other places too.
Right. I was just wondering.
Yeah.
I feel like that happens in a lot of government anyway, right?
It does. Yeah. And there's just a switch going on. We have like it's called the swinging door of employees working for a city or for the government. Then you go out and become a lobbyist or a salesman for the other. And, oh, that's bad. You're using your connections and all that. The law is just changing on that. When I started practicing, I could win a case like that. The public's just changing their minds, and judges are changing their minds. You can still get away with it right now, but it's a short-term deal. It's going to change.
Do the same.
So if you're looking towards the future, just think through that. Now might not be the time to change that, but make a note that when you get here 5 years from now, if it's still in there, that needs to be on your consideration list.
Is there a reason why now would not be the time to change that?
That's a local political question.
Okay.
Yeah. I've seen it be pretty good too. Like, my mom used to work for a city, retired, and ran for council 18, 24 months later, and they love it. I mean,
Because then you kind of already
Oh,
have a heads up. Like,
I've done more than one excellent city council member who was a former city employee. They weren't disgruntled and revenge seeking. They just knew where the bodies were located and knew how to save money, or knew how to avoid lawsuits. So it's a political, what I'm saying is it's a political reason you have it in there, and the courts that's how they view it. It's political. It's a political barrier.
my recommendation would be to
Participation.
take it out. I just don't think it's worth the risk. If we have a disgruntled employee that runs and gets elected, then so be it. That's
Then they're representative of their constituents.
Yeah.
That means you have a lot of people in town that are upset
Yeah.
with you.
Yeah.
Well, and I would offer, Cleveland School District, we had some places come open, and we had a group of people trying to overthrow the superintendent, if that makes sense. And so, yeah, 2 or 3 former employees who had not been out 5 years won, and protected.
Oh,
So that's why I asked, like, is it, yeah, so
it can work both ways.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's just the nature of, I think, our business.
Yes,
That-
so-
that's just
so
the way
y'all
it
understand
works,
that.
Unfortunately, yeah, we hope it doesn't, but that's the way it goes.
I'm, so just think about it and we can, we're suggesting you take it out, but the council may say, no, we're not ready to do that. I don't know. Then the next one is this, this subpart E goes back to section 3.02, the prohibiting holding other offices. And so, sure, you can't serve two masters, personal interest, conflict of interest, the idea that, well, we want your undivided attention. And again, 30 years ago, that was standard, always a winner. It's just questionable now whether you can do that because, so what I'm suggesting is you take out this unique wording and replace it with shall not violate the Texas state law against dual office holding. Because that way you're just saying, well, it's Texas law, we have to do that anyway. And so dual office holding, I can't tell you what that means now because to me it's just a area in flux now. And so if you say that, then you're just gonna, if the question comes up, you're gonna get a legal opinion on what does dual office holding mean. And so you'll have a current legal opinion based upon the specific facts. And the specific facts always affect the legal opinion. So, and then the next one, F at the bottom of the page, not being arrears in the payment of taxes or other liability due to the city. This is also very standard. And no, who could argue with that one? I don't want somebody that doesn't pay taxes to be elected to council. But again, the question is, so somebody would vote for that? It's a barrier to political participation. It's a barrier against poor people. It's a barrier against debtors. So I think you can probably still get away with it, but you need to understand that that's how it's viewed nowadays. And then the rest of that,
Can I
I'm
ask a
sorry,
question
yes.
on that one, Gary? If they owned a business that went out of business and owed back taxes, are they in arrears? Yes.
Yeah, that'd be tax collection. And that's a good point. I mean, so now, not only did I lose their business, but now they can't be on the council, although maybe they may be a valuable citizen. Again, do you want to create barriers to candidates participating or to voters voting, or do you want to let the voters exercise the biggest value of their vote, even knowing they sometimes elect people that cause us staff people real trouble? That happens pretty rare.
Are there other people in other forms of government that don't?
There are, and so, but this is just due the city.
Just generally speaking.
This is just due the city. Yes, there's certainly. I mean, there's again, tax collection is what I started doing. Everybody, it's poor people, rich people, everybody doesn't pay taxes. But in Texas, over 90% of us do pay our taxes.
And our collection rate in the city of White House is like 103%.
Texas is a actual model in the United States for tax collection and tax payment. We created a way of collecting taxes that's been exported to the other 49 states. Texas law firms do tax collection all over the United States. Literally. They put me as a city attorney out of business because they got the law changed where I couldn't collect a fee for the city for collecting taxes. Only a private lawyer could collect a fee. So that
Better lobbyists than you were.
Better lobbyists, they sure were. Now, that's the first part. The second part is, again, standard used to be common, still fairly. This next provision is not unusual to be in the charter, but it's normally ignored. Nor be disqualified by reason of any provision of any other section of this charter. It just says, and anything else I can think of that I would allow me to get you off my council or prevent you from running. That's what it says to me as a defense lawyer. Imagine what it says to a plaintiff.
Which from a staff perspective, really like horrible place for us to be in because the other candidate looks for us to enforce it and.
And if you'd even try, well, you wouldn't try
no, we
because
wouldn't,
you can't win that. And you just, so you get sued twice.
Yeah, everybody's mad before they get elected.
So it is my suggestion or recommendation that we take that out. But I can understand the council, sometimes for political reasons you say, or I'm familiar with elected officials saying things like, yeah, I know we need to do that, but we're just not ready to do that. And to me, it's the same thing I've heard jurors say, now, ma'am, we found you not guilty, but don't you run any more red lights like you did the other day. So it's, sometimes we just ignore laws.
Well,
My advice is take it out if you're going to ignore it.
the last meeting we mentioned too, that sometimes just having it in there is enough to prevent some people from, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And that's what was put in there in the 60s and the 40s. It's not why we keep it in there, I don't think, but that is its origin. And then we've got one more. G on the next page, top of page 13, you can be disqualified if you've been convicted of a crime involving moral turpitude, conduct that is contrary to the community standard of justice, honesty, good morals, or any other felony. And again, I have experience with defending community standards with cable companies, and cities used to regulate content of cable TV. And we don't anymore, and you don't have any more authority to do that. So you can leave this in there, and you can attempt to enforce it. And as long as the person you enforce it against acquiesces, you win. But if somebody sues you, it's a barrier to voting and participation. And if the state voting laws don't prohibit this person from being a Texas voter, then your prohibition, well, the state standards aren't strong enough for us. We want more. You can say that, but you'll just lose that lawsuit.
So if they lose their voting right because of the crime they've committed, then they can't run it.
Well, then they can't run. So you don't need to say, just say, well, I'm sorry, you're not a voter. Now you realize the law is also changing so that even when you're convicted of a crime of moral turpitude, there's states now where you can get your voting rights restored. Even if you did something that we'd probably all agree involved turpitude. And
are we going to define turpitude for the voters who aren't going to?
Well, another reason I would, I think you have a professional staff. So when you do that, you call a lawyer and you get a current legal opinion on what moral turpitude is based upon the specific facts.
Yeah. I guess just my thing is, when we're done with this, we hand it to the voters to say, I agree or I don't agree with that. And if there is something that seems alarming, like, I don't know, they may or may not be willing to.
Yeah, I mean the uninformed voter, or could say, well, gosh, they're just lowering the standards. We're gonna start electing criminals, and well, if a criminal has the ability to vote, I guess so. We have a public debate going on in the United States right now about what a criminal is. So, do you want to be in the middle of one of those? So as a lawyer who defends cities, I would say, I just don't think it's worth it. You're increasing the odds that you'll get sued. You will spend more money, and even if you win, you will spend more money, and you probably won't win. But, then the next one. This is also standard. It's good. Not be related within the second degree by affinity, marriage, or third degree consanguinity. And the state law, this is all based on state law, and they show charts, like 1 degree, your spouse, your children, your parents, you go 1, 2, 3 degrees. So this has always made a lot of sense to Texans. This is another one that's very common in Texas. So let me, but I put in this, well, what if the relative is already working for this? They have a relative working for, my cousin works for the city. It's a first cousin, or my mom works for the city, or I work for the city and my mom or my brother wants to run for council. And maybe they're wanting to run for council not because to get me a raise or something, because they might not be able to vote on my raise if that's a conflict of interest, so to speak. But this is a standard one, but again, you just need to look at it. This makes sense. I understand we don't want somebody getting on the city council and making decisions that are good for, I'm running for my family. Well, I can't tell you how many mayors, council members, and elected officials at every stage say, I'm running for office to protect my family. That's why people run for office. So this will be a good town. But we're saying, but your relative can't run, or if your relative works for the city, you can't run for council, or if you run for council, you can't hire that person.
This has very Yellowstone vibes to me. I don't know if anybody wants to
Yeah,
tell it.
thank you very much.
But I'm like, they want to run their town, so
Yeah.
they've got one that's in charge of the ag and one that's running for council or
And
Congress
yes,
or
that's not unusual. So it's just be aware of that. Yeah, this may be one that you notice I didn't line through. I think you'll probably want to keep it. I just want you to be aware that it's also a barrier to either political participation as a candidate or having the opportunity to be a public servant. You just need to go to the next town.
Yeah, but isn't it common that, I mean, that other companies, because you run like a company kind of, isn't it common that companies have similar rules where they can't work with someone who can impact your?
Surprisingly, no. Because
would
how
be
many
able to
companies do you
put
know
down
where
somebody.
I'm the branch officer because my dad owns a company? That's
Well, that's
actually
it.
much more common
That
than
is
it's
actually
uncommon.
common, yeah. But I guess if they don't.
It's one of the
connect
differences between
directly.
private business and cities. One of the main differences.
Which we have a nepotism policy that applies to all employees.
Okay.
But this is talking specifically about elected officials being related to an existing employee, not employees being related to each other. Like spouses can both work for the city,
And
but they can't work in the same department.
Okay.
it's just an interesting thing. It's not unusual. It's common, but it's also one that is in a lot of Texas orders and has, I learned, surprisingly was often ignored because particularly in smaller towns, it's got both family and race obstacles in it. And so you just have to be careful. If you keep it in there, just understand you need to approach each situation and look at the facts of that situation. Okay, then if we keep going, now we finished the qualifications. So now the charter has the disqualifications. And so we're going to say nearly all of these all over again. So if you look down to ABC, there's that you get disqualified if you're convicted of a crime involving moral turpitude. So we've taken it out once. I presume if we take it out once, we should take it out all. And so I went ahead. That's what I would suggest. I'd actually even recommend that. But you're the recommenders to the council who are the final decision makers on the vote. And then the voters actually decide. So y'all understand. I think that's the rest of these. I think we talked through.
About the attendance of council.
Oh, the
without
three.
disputes,
Yeah. Not unusual for cities to want to have their elected officials show up. And you would think that after you go to all of the trouble of running for office, you'd be there, and, well, you just don't know Texas. There are cities that have trouble. There have been little cities in East Texas in the last 2 years that have had trouble getting a quorum. Because people get upset, and if I'm gonna always be defeated on the 3-2 vote, then I just quit going. And if you don't have a quorum, we've had actually lawsuits about that. There's a process you have to go through. It involves the state. And costs you a whole lot of money.
The judge had to order him to come back for meetings.
Yeah, you get one of those state district judges. So. Because you do have an obligation if you're elected. So there's nothing wrong with having this in there. You just need to decide what the 3 is 3.
Is 3 good, or is 3 too many to miss because they're only meeting once a month?
We haven't had it, and it's 3 consecutive,
Consecutive.
so you'd have to be out 3 full months, and I think it would have to be some pretty extreme circumstances before the council even exercised that power. It would have to be something like Gary mentioned, or someone was incapacitated and couldn't resign on their own will, potentially. So having that authority and power to remove someone in that case, I've never seen it done. I don't
We've
know.
it.
Probably had a lot.
We've had
I think we have, well, it was incapacitated. The person could not.
in my lifetime. I've seen judges who were incapacitated. I've seen judges wheeled into courtrooms to vote by writing because they can't speak. Again, I don't want to be political, but if you watch national politics, you've seen elected people who are incapacitated by any standard in all levels of government. And what does that tell us? It tells us that the system and the courts value what the voters decide. Even if they want to elect somebody with some turpitude or somebody who isn't going to show up, you're going to have a hard time getting rid of it.
Yeah, and I don't.
I'm not saying it can't be done.
I don't know that we would ever recommend it short of some pretty extreme circumstances. We didn't have to be.
It would. Again,
They're
you would,
missing a scene
when
for
you
2
find
years or
yourself
something.
getting into that, you want to try to
Yeah.
find a cousin or relative that can help them.
Yes.
Get them to just resign.
Yeah.
And then sometimes you have to, there are time limits on that where you need to do this or now we're going to be, it just gets complicated. But it's not unusual, nothing unusual with having this in a charter. Just, again, depends on the specific facts. 304, here's a change where the council is the judge of the qualifications of its members, and the prior charter had within 5 days, you're going to do something. And so let's, this is, I think, with the staff, let's, as soon as possible in accordance with state law. Things take time. And
The county elections office can't give us all the provisional and absentee ballots within 5 days usually.
No, it's like everything. You may have an employee you need to fire, but you just don't fire them until you have your paperwork ready. Don't do this until your paperwork's ready. You can tell somebody to sit there. Your job is to not do anything, or your job is you need to take the time it takes to do it right the first time. So, and you learn that either the easy way or the hard way. Going through this, on this next page, we're talking about the powers of the council on page 14, article, or section 3.09. I use the green and the blue here because these are references that are references to selling bonds and a bond ordinance, and then references to zoning and planning, which are, this is I believe this is the first place these are mentioned in the charter. And then these are both mentioned specifically either under the finance department or under departments. So I'm just highlighting it that as we go through, let's pick one place to put it. And this is one place for it, or finance department is one place, or finances, or planning and development zoning is another place. That continues over on the next page, reference to planning and zoning. There's a reference in here to the powers of the council. And so M on page 15, fix the salaries and compensation of city employees, set up qualifications and standards. And so you can see there's wording to be added upon recommendation from the city manager. Because again, you say in other places that is the manager's job. If the CEO's job is to create a budget, well, you usually do salaries and qualifications as part of that. So we got a lot of mix up here where we're kind of saying the same thing, but when you talk about the same topic in three different places with different words, just give guys like me an opportunity to say you're doing it. Because it's not, if we're going to have them in three different places, they need to say the exact same thing every time. And when you do that, usually people say, well, let's just say it once.
Because there's too much misinterpretation.
Because I guarantee you, I'm going to
That's
find
it.
the first thing that applies to what I'm looking for, and I'm done. I'm not looking.
Yeah,
Sorry, this is where-
that's what everybody does,
Yeah.
except the other
Well,
guy's
I'm not
lawyer.
even going to look.
And so all of these on here are, there are certainly ultimate powers of the city council, but I'm suggesting they might go in another location. I don't necessarily have a recommendation where that would be yet. And then we continue over to page 16. Section 313, appointment of the city manager. This is another one of those references to number of years before we can do something. So I'm just highlighting that so you'll know. You have several places where you talk about qualifications, disqualifications are, I want you to be thinking about, increasingly these are viewed as barriers to something. So increasingly the courts will look at this as your attempt to restrict something. Doesn't mean it's a bad idea. It doesn't mean you don't want it. It just means take a second look at it. And then on section 314 in the middle of page 16, I highlighted that because I wanted to draw your attention particularly to section 309B, which is a couple of pages before that. And it says specifically under the power of the council. So we have the power of the council to establish, create, consolidate, or abolish administrative departments and distribute the work of divisions, comma, upon recommendation of the city manager. So when I read that, I'm thinking, so this is the city manager's job. It's why you hire a professional city manager. But you say that's the council's power. So maybe that needs to be under the city manager with just this, the city manager shall establish, create, consolidate, or abolish and distribute the work upon, shall recommend for approval to the city council. To me, if that's what you mean, then let's say that instead of this, which kind of says, well, this is the council. But I forgot. It's upon her recommendation. Well, put it under her section and not the council's, because it's already under her section, or under the city manager's section. And then over here you have this under 314. So that's the first place. Here's the duplicate. In regard to administrative and executive duties under the city manager, the council and its members shall deal solely through the city manager, either publicly or privately. So that's, to me, a core, pretty strong statement. And it's buried in the middle of this paragraph, in the middle of the article talking about the power of the city council. So I'm just not trying to cause any trouble. I'm just saying, wouldn't this be long? If you're going to leave it here, then say, start off the sentence with, upon the recommendation of the city manager, like the council will approve the budget upon the presentation and recommendation of the manager. We need to standardize all the wording, because all the places where you say something different, you're just creating somebody to say, well, this is worded differently, so I think the council's relationship with the manager is different on this one. And I don't think that's the purpose, that's the intent of your chart. But you don't say it consistently.
Did we skip over the 3.13 nor within 2 years after the expiration of the term?
We probably did. 3 point.
I think you're just saying it's another figure year.
Oh. Yes. Yes. So I just, again, they're saying we don't want a council member to become the city manager within 2 years after their term expires. So we don't want them to, we want to dissuade them from firing that manager so you can hire me. But the problem is whenever you do that from me, you're taking away some of the discretion of the council. What if your manager leaves, or what if you have a problem and for whatever reason you can't find the right manager and the council says we would like to appoint this guy? I'm not sure I understand why the council's authority is restricted. But since it's in the charter, that means the voters approved it. So this to me is suggesting, well, maybe the council doesn't, or maybe the voters don't trust the council, but that doesn't make any sense because they elect the council. So I think this is just not worded well, or didn't think through why do you want the 2 year? But again, I didn't line through it. Just be aware of that. Continuing through here, then we get to page 17, section 317, 318, 319, 320. These are highlighted in yellow because these look like really, they're under the powers of the council, and they certainly are, but these are duties of the city secretary and city manager. So I'm just thinking, wouldn't it make more sense we don't need to change them, just move them so that when you're reading about this, because who publishes the ordinance, who takes care of what you do with ordinances, bonds for employees, there's just money issues strung throughout this charter from beginning to end. And I want us to just put them all in one place. Maybe they either need to all go under money, the finance chapter, or under the position that's actually doing that. And so some of those are city council and some of them are city in general, but they're all administered by the manager. So as we go through here, we may want to move those around.
Do we have official newspaper in the city?
We do. It's required by state law. We have to pick it every year, and it's the
Tyler paper.
Once upon a time, editors had a good lobby.
Yeah.
That's just the law that nobody's harassed the legislature yet, because I don't think newspapers have the authority anymore.
Every year,
we don't know what to do. There's got to be this idea of publication and notice. So we have the Open Meetings Act, and you have it posted outside, or you have electronic, and then we created the internet. So now it can be 24 hours all over, and the legislature is just like, we still require you and every other city in Texas to pay the newspaper to print classified ads that nobody's read for 30 years.
It's not cheap.
So politics. And then let me just point out at the bottom of this, section 3.21, investigative powers of the council. I didn't highlight that one in yellow, but there are, as we go through here, by the time we get to the end, you're gonna see more than one paragraph talking about investigative powers of the city. And sometimes it's talking about the city council, and sometimes it's talking about the manager. So I am, as we come through here, I want you to be aware of that, and maybe we can come up with a solution where we just say what we really mean instead of saying it in about 3 different places. Because the way it is now, you could, conceivably have 2 investigations going on at the same time of each other. And that would be not a good situation.
Council can be there involving on.
And then on page 18, you see the green. These are powers of the city council, specifically the city council, but they weren't included under the powers of the city council. They were put under the general provisions at the end of the charter. So I'd say let's just move them back here. So we put them here, but then as you read through these, that first one, the power to remit penalties. The city council shall have the power to remit and hold or impart any fine or penalty belonging to the city which may be imposed upon any ordinance or resolution passed pursuant to this charter. So what they're trying to say, the council is the ultimate decision maker in everything. And so if the council can change the fine or if somebody doesn't get a permit or doesn't comply with the rules to get a permit or a plat and a fine is issued, the council has the authority to just be inconsistent and unfair. They do.
So you can
Just
go
like
to city
Congress.
council and say, hey,
You
I don't want
can.
to pay this fine, and they can all say, you don't have to pay this fine.
The catch is the way this is written, it's kind of confusing because, well, then, okay, I'm the judge fined me. And well, those are probably state laws, but there are also traffic violations and other city ordinances that are tried in municipal court, code enforcement cases where the judge sets the fine. And if your council changes the judge's fine, you've picked a fight with the state. And you don't want to do that because you won't win that one either. Because you'll find out that actually all the judges in the state, including municipal judges, are state judges. You just think they're municipal judges. So that's another, we're going to talk about that tonight when we get to it. But so probably that just needs a little wordsmithing. And then the next one, the retirement system. So yes, the council has the authority to be nice and pay employees a salary and decide the retirement, but wow, that's kind of a budget and salary issue. So shouldn't that be with all the other budget and salary issues? Because we're saying it more than once. So it's highlighted in green, meaning it's just moved here. This makes more sense than having it at the end, but hopefully this says, yeah, but this is not the right place. And then special powers, yeah, that's good. That's the special secret powers the city has. So there's nothing wrong with saying
Figure
that.
out what those are.
Good luck. And so, I mean, as a lawyer, I'm never going to say take out. I got some secret
I
powers.
won't know it until the state
I want to be
legislature takes
careful.
it away anyway.
I'm not sure this is the right place for that. I think it probably needs to go up at the front so it's a little more highlighted. And then finally, the last one, the disaster clause. This is one that White House is kind of must have had some type of disaster situation in the past. So
We probably borrowed it.
this is one where I think we just want to think through that. There's at least one other place where it talks specifically about disasters, and let's put those two together and then see if they need to go for the city manager or city council. I'm not sure.
Actually do that though?
Well, I just moved it because I need to research. If you want to keep that, then it needs to be researched to make sure you can do it that
Didn't
way.
know that.
I never had actually seen one like that. That was kind of new, but I'm intrigued.
Designated Survivor is a show where.
Yeah, so like, there's only one of us left, so I hereby nominate myself. It's two of us, so all for you. It's a tie. I break the tie, you're it.
Disaster succession plan? Do we have a disaster
No.
succession plan?
Oh, you don't? Okay, that was a follow-up question. Okay, so you got this from a much bigger city. Because, Tyler's got a disaster succession plan, and there's state, with some federal grants, you have to create a plan, which means you have to hire somebody who will come in and write you a plan for your size type of organization.
Listen, if all of our elected officials are lost, we're just.
Now,
Started, we're just done.
you need to understand, I can think of some situations where you just got to realize you're Texans, just do what you need to do,
Yeah.
and we'll clean it up tomorrow. Just save people. Take care of the town today. Don't listen to your lawyer. Just do the best you can, and realize you may have to pay somebody tomorrow. All right, so 7. Administration. You want me to just keep going through this? So I started off with wanting the same general approach of trying to kind of simplify and do all this administration. But, and so I went through and I realized like there were 3 sections for the city secretary, 3 or 4 sections for the city manager, 3 sections for police, 3 sections for fire. So all those can just be put into one. Just say fire department and talk about the chief, the assistant chief, and all of that. So there's a consolidation. But then as I read through that, and I found that other section I read to you, the one buried under the powers of the council about, it's the manager's job to create and abolish, subject to approval by the council. Then I'm thinking, okay, so if it's the manager's job to do that, why does the charter say, but we need to have a fire department, and we want you to pay those firemen a salary, policemen a salary, and we want you to have an assistant chief, or we want you to be a fireman. So one way of approaching administration, I haven't even mentioned this to you yet, because I was just, we can clean up at Article 4 Administrative Services, or you could have a discussion with the council, and maybe this is not a discussion we want to have, and say, well, do we really want to, in our charter, say, by golly, we need a police department and a fire department and a planning department and a finance department, or do you want to just say, we need a city manager who's going to be the CEO and who's going to create all the departments. You do need, now this is going to sound like a lawyer, but you do need a separate section for the city attorney, because the attorney works mostly for the council. So, but here you already got the wording that the city manager recommends the city attorney to the council. But you need a separate section for city attorney so you have some independence. We've already talked, and we want to create a separate section for the city secretary. It's kind of a consensus that there should. So we want to kind of interfere with the city manager's authority to create and manage the city structure by saying, but of course we want a city attorney, and of course we want a city secretary, and they have some separate responsibilities and rules, and that's what's in those sections. And of course we need a municipal court judge. So you could, under administration, just have those. We have a separate article for legal and a separate article for municipal court, and I'm just saying, I don't know why you do. I mean, that's a council created position, just like the city manager. So why don't you just put all those together. And then if we put those together, then maybe we want to show the difference between city attorney, municipal court judge, city secretary, city manager, and all the other departments by saying, well, we don't need the charter to say we need a police department. Well, of course, we're going to have a police department. But we also want a street department and a water department.
But what if the, to be the devil's advocate, because that's just, I roll, I think sometimes. So what if the city manager, we don't want this, but maybe there's somebody who is like, defund the police department. Like, I don't think we need police here. And they just have the power to abolish the police department.
Subject to the approval of the council.
Okay. So everything the city manager
Well,
does.
I would say whether you write in here, subject to the approval of the council, from my experience as a city attorney, everything the city manager does is subject to the approval of the council. And even if they approved it, they could just change their mind and say, thank you, we just want to do something else. So a city manager and council always know that. That's part of their dance.
Okay.
Like a superintendent number one. It's just like an attorney in a client.
My
So-
authority and influence is strictly limited to the granting of that from the city council. It says in the charter, I make the recommendations, but let's be real, like, it's subject to their willingness to let me have that
That's
authority
correct.
and influence. And so, you do see city managers, for example, justified or not, fire a police chief who's well loved by the community. And then I've seen city councils turn around and fire that city manager and rehire the police chief or not and move on. So I think there's, those of us that are interested in keeping our jobs are committed to making sure we have that kind of blessing by the city council.
That if you're interested in the tax balance.
Yeah.
And that's how it works. But I've had conversations with city managers saying, yes, you can fire that person. You have the authority to, but if you do, you're going to be fired. Because the only way the council can say no, they can't tell you, hire that person, fire that person. But they can just say, you're fired. That's why it's nice to have a contract and all that, but that's just how it works. It has to be a majority of them. It's, and so, yes, well, do we need to put the safeguard of having a police department in here so that that's public safety, and so we don't want to take the chance that we would have a lunatic manager who would get rid of the fire department or the police chief. And that is one of the reasons why they probably put this in there. And that is how I thought when I first started practicing law. We need to say all that stuff. And as I've worked and watched the process work, I just realized that, if the city manager doesn't get it, sometimes the council doesn't get it either. Sometimes but usually the council figures out pretty quick what they want to do. And normally elected officials ultimately don't have any trouble getting a different hiring employee, if that's what they want. If they feel like there's just not communication going on. Sometimes even when there is communication. So, but again, it may be that it's everything going on. It might not be a good time to take out the police department because people might say, oh, that committee wants to defund the police and the fire. They're getting rid of the fire department. We're going back to the volunteer fire department. I mean, so it might not be worth it. Might not be worth it.
What, a couple of, I don't know, 7 years ago, 8 years ago, that one of our departments abolished. With the council's blessing, though, it wouldn't have happened without the council approving it. That was a very real concern.
Sometimes you have employees other than the city manager. Don't get it.
So this is probably a random question, but I work in HR, right? And so if we're changing someone's job description, like it kind of feels somewhat like what we're doing with city manager if we make changes here. I
Yeah.
mean, is there any say, or is the council's approval of this like the only say that you get on that? Do you have any like weight on that? Like, hey, this is not the job I signed up for, kind of thing.
I mean, they would ask for, I would certainly have my opportunity.
I would think they would ask her on all of
it. Just like I am here,
Yeah.
I would have that same kind of voice with them, and so, but ultimately, it's up to the council. I serve at the pleasure of the council, who serves at the pleasure of the electorate, so, they can take my advice or not, and that's okay. We both have decisions. I mean,
Truthfully.
yeah.
Just curious.
So at this stage, we probably, for tonight anyway, we keep all these departments in here. We just want to, even if we keep them, let's put them all in one section. We just don't need, because again, somebody reads it and they think this is it. Well, no, there's something in here. And then there was specialized wording in there about the fire marshal and the fire chief. And again, the first lawsuit I was ever involved with involved how fire marshals got to be in Texas. It's
A peace
fascinating.
officer.
But they're not special like that.
Yeah, fire marshals can write tickets and arrest and doing, not anymore.
They're code enforcement for like homes, right? Don't do any of that.
The fire marshals kind of may think they're like game wardens.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but
Power person.
Because, yeah, there were times when I was working in housing, where we were like, a fire marshal has a lot of, like, say on the housing front, like what we could do in the university.
Well,
housing.
and
They
that-
enforce fire code.
Yes.
fire
So,
code,
Yeah.
but it's not necessarily what we think of as code enforcement. Yes. Like,
Important one. Again, you have employees, Texas is a big state, and so we have really every type of situation. So I'm just saying,
You said it gracefully.
I'm saying that there's nothing wrong with having a reference to the fire department, police department, planning and zoning department, or parks department, if you want to do that. A lot of cities, as they get bigger, there's a specific effort in Texas to have charter references to parks. There are cities that have separate funding for parks departments, because that's, in some parts of Texas, that's a bigger deal than the police department. So it can be whatever the council and the public is comfortable with, but my suggestions are trying to just standardize it. And so I think you're in a better position if for all the city positions where the council wants the manager to act as a CEO. These are positions that manager's going to be hiring in the routine day-to-day, setting their salaries and qualifications as part of the budget process. Then the less specific references we have to them in the charter, just think through it, the better it's going to operate. And you put all those other references into the charter for the legal reason to make it more difficult. Because that's what happens. And so if there's not a desire to do that, then whenever you amend the charter, you have an opportunity. That I call that the cleanup. What is it that you want? And you want the charter to first off, like you want as we're going through here, it's the staff's aware of this. We want to make sure that when it says something, that's what y'all are actually doing. Because usually when I do this, we have some fun moments because we don't never do that. Well, then we have to change this, because you can't go through a charter amendment, leave wording in there that you haven't been doing and aren't intending to do, because that really is asking for trouble.
All right, Gary, you want to talk about 4.01?
for, yes, the city manager qualifications and appointment. This is that residency issue. And so I have suggested, and I would recommend, that rather than putting resident requirements in there, I know cities always want the manager to live here. You want the manager to pay your taxes. And I'm familiar with cities where managers commute, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. Depends on the manager. But you are restricting, the way I view it is, I'm not helping my client, the city council, by restricting their options and who they hire. I want to give the city council as many options as I can, if that's what they want. So you want to hire a qualified city manager. If you want this manager to live here, then as part of your negotiations, you say, you're going to have to move here. And if you do that, then put it in the contract. Because if you hire a manager who doesn't live here and you require them to move here, and then you fire them or the manager leaves to another job, they're probably going to leave town. So just put it in the contract rather than putting it in the charter. There's more than one way for a city council as an employer to hire somebody and have them live close. And one of the least effective ways is to put it in the charter. Just put it in the contract. Because then you have a specific, no, this wasn't a charter amendment. We just talked about it. And plus then you have that, how long is it going to take to find a house? What do you do? There's all kinds of details that come up. All kinds. And you have annexation, you have all kinds. So and then the next one on here is the city council require the manager to enter a bond. And this is part of this. There's references to employee bonds about 6 more places in here. So yes, you just need one statement that the city can require surety bonds or employee bonds. And when you do that, you need to say the city's going to pay for it, because cities always wind up paying for it. Or you can, in the contract, say they're going to do that. But so it doesn't need to be in the charter. It needs to be in the one section somewhere in the charter that says you have employees, maybe a finance person, if you have an auditor, where you want them to have a bond to secure their decision making.
So the bond is like an insurance.
It's an insurance policy on the city manager doing something dumb.
Yeah.
Without the council knowing about it and catching them too late. So it's a second backup. Mm-hmm. And so that's why the city pays for it, because you want to buy that policy and you want to write it the way you want, because you're going to pay for it. And the person you're talking about, the manager or the finance director or the auditor, it's not going to be here if you're going to use the bond. So we just put that in one place. And then there's several references. There's all kinds of different bonds. There's bonds for an employee insurance, and that's really probably here just the manager. Then you have the city posting bonds for doing things, and you've got a special process for that. You don't have to do that. And then you have contractor bonds when you do public works construction projects. So there's nothing wrong with having a reference to that in your charter, but my goodness, that's just doing a good construction contract. So performance and payment bonds, it can be in the charter, but that's just management. If you have a good manager, that professional manager is going to have a written contract. And a good written contract is going to have financial security in the appropriate way. So I think those two could come out. And they're, to me, neither one of these are really helping or informing the council in deciding who their best city manager candidate is, which is kind of what this is supposed to be.
And one of the points that frequently comes up, to Gary's point, is we want your city manager to live in the city so that they pay city taxes. So I live in the city, I pay city taxes, but I don't pay the city water bill. I'm on a different water provider. Well,
Detail.
it doesn't matter one way or the other. And hopefully a professional manager that they're committed either whether they live here or not. And if you don't, get rid of them. I don't know, I'm interested on your thoughts because you have similar.
I don't,
5.5 square months, so finding a house here. I had to annex into the city.
yeah, it's
I
challenging.
did.
I thought I remembered you saying that.
It's challenging. And, you know, like my wife and I have been talking about, you live in the city of our house or we live in the zone, right? You can, well, all I was told I needed to live in the, I think, inside the school district.
Right, which is much larger, right?
Yeah, which gives you a little bit more of some flexibility, but, yeah, it's challenging when inventory and all those things. And it's been 10 months of, renting.
Oh my gosh.
I think it can make or break a council's ability to negotiate with a qualified candidate if they're not willing to move within, if they don't have inventory for houses, right? You don't want to move here, there's no houses available, or there's nothing that you think is big enough for your family or whatever issue might come up.
Spouse is likely quitting their job and moving as well, so not being able to split the difference in commute or, any of those kind of things becomes a challenge too.
They may scare off somebody who is a really qualified candidate that wants to be the city manager, may do a really good job by telling them you have to live in this little square.
Then that's what I mean.
And that gives them
Restricting
the
their
negotiating ability for the council to sit down and say, okay, well, we really want this person to be here, so we're going to be willing to negotiate it rather than having it in the charter.
And especially if you're hiring someone that's somewhat local, right? Like Sunnyvale, you have to move.
Yeah.
Well, I had to move, but my house, that I lived in for 5 years, I paid 2.9% interest rate. And I'm gonna pay almost 7% to move here, and so, while I'm getting,
It affects the negotiation.
it absolutely does.
Yeah.
And the
It
superintendent
just
contracts, that is less and less of a requirement as people are becoming more and more desperate to find a good qualified candidate. It is still, it's less, the norm, I think. Maybe in some smaller towns, but I think in the Metroplex area, I don't think, a friend of mine was the HR person in McKinney ISD, and they hired an assistant superintendent, not in his contract, but told him verbally, you need to live here. He never did. They fired him.
Did you get paid for that?
He just
I don't
wanted to
know.
wait because he didn't want to fight. If they didn't find him bad, they were going to find something, right? We
No.
showed up 2 days late to work. We told you, you're gone.
The rest of this, so.
But yeah, I mean, it's a. I don't have something to ask for, but I think it's a limitation.
I also had a job where I commuted an hour each way, and I can tell you I was in the office more than most people that lived in town. Like, to me, that just doesn't impact my commitment to my
Right.
position. So.
I also think how, I feel like Harry says it in different ways. Like you've said it a million different ways today, but like when you put something down expressly into this, then it's just, begging to be scrutinized and picked over. And then I also think that people will, if there's so much detail in it, they'll look for detail in everything that you're doing, and they won't be able to find some answers if they're looking for other policy.
It's too bad it can't be like the shall, it can be preferred, you know what I mean? Or, but I don't think the charter's not written that way, it doesn't appear to be. It'd be more of a contract.
That would be better, yeah.
Yeah, but,
And that's what I
Put it
would
in my
recommend.
employment contract.
but someone from the outside is gonna see that, and they're gonna say, oh,
Yeah.
you're making White House less special, I think, by allowing people that don't live here.
I'm gonna go do remote work from
Yeah.
Orlando.
Or you've got someone from your rival city coming, coming to
Right.
do your
That's a
city
school
manager
district.
job.
Well, you have a person thinking that's what matters, and the
Yeah.
catch is,
That moved across.
if you hire a real professional, that's such a minor detail, it's not gonna matter.
No.
If that's actually one of the better things you can say, well, they live here, then you probably didn't hire the person with the skills you need. I mean,
Slim pickings.
That's not what you're hiring to be my neighbor. I'm hiring you to know how to get money and build things and talk nice to people. Sure, interesting skills.
But not all city managers have.
So we have that, then we have all these powers and duties of the city manager. And so here's where I'm kind of saying, you know, you saw it under the powers of the city, saw it under the powers of the city council, and now you're seeing it under the powers of the city manager. So we do have some things that are literally in triplicate in here. And so we can't take everything out, but I'm just saying this is a good opportunity to if you're comfortable and if the council is ultimately comfortable, make a push to really take a step forward. This is 2025. Really, you know, maybe we could get a 2020 charter instead of a 1995 charter, which is typically what cities do because they want to be careful and I just can't take that stuff out. Yep, but we're not doing that. It's okay. I just don't want to take it. So that's where you get to the local, you know, what's it worth? Sometimes it's not worth it. If somebody thinks you're trying to defund the police, that'll ruin your election. I mean, that's not, no, we're just.
It's not worth demolishing.
It's not worth
trust over.
Yes.
Right.
So then we have on that next page, city manager term and removal. So at the request of the manager, I just got rid of any references to being able to, I'll just.
Well done.
Not allowed.
Yeah, so like this is, I mean, they can do that, whether it's in here or not. And this, again, this is a mixed blessing, you know. There's just way too much wording in here. I mean, you're just.
Contract?
It should be, so it doesn't need to be in here. And again, if you're going to say the same thing 2 times or 3 times, well, then you have to make sure you're saying it exactly the same, or else you have not helped yourself. The city has. And so this just needs to come up.
I have to have 3 affirmative because that's what you work with the council. Like all these things.
Yeah, they're just.
There was at one time that the, says with all members present, that had not always been there. But that, yeah.
And that's an interesting thing because that's also very typical when sometimes when a city is becoming dysfunctional and it's a split on the council, it becomes increasingly it's impossible to have all the council. That is the current wow factor for disgruntled council members in Texas right now. I'm just not going to show up. And then you can.
So that's the case I'm packing my stuff anyway.
You have a problem. I mean, you already have a problem.
Quite quickly.
Yeah, you don't sell it.
Yeah, I mean.
I'll sit it right in the wall.
Yeah.
Oh, so
Pay me what my contract says.
you know what the fire needs to say,
Yeah.
man, you know?
Yeah.
Yep, I know, sir. Man.
Let's get the ends and move on.
Yep.
So then that next section is city manager investigative powers. So, and I made a reference there to go back to 321, which says city council investigative powers, and then go back to Article 2, which has city investigative powers. So we just want to think through that, and as part of this process, again, we don't want to make people think we're trying to change the balance of power, but I want to ensure that I would prefer you to only have it in there once or twice, but I don't care how many times you have it in there, but you need to say the same thing every time, or you're just creating a problem. Because you already have a problem when you start looking for the investigative power section. So you need clarity.
The reason enough to have it both under city council and city manager, the reason why I asked is if city manager needs to do an investigation on, purely an example, police chief, for certain warnings, like there are statutory requirements to that investigation. The same with council level, that if, in the case, city manager is a certified peace officer and there are related investigations that need to be done, the reason to have that under the section. Because
Could be, yeah, that could be.
Okay.
You sure could, yep. Again, specific facts, and yeah, that's not an unusual situation in Texas. A lot of former police chiefs are city managers. or they have a peace officer, a badge
So
in
there
it.
are very specific requirements when you're doing investigation on a law enforcement officer on the process and how that has to go. And so,
Yeah, that could be a reason. The next one is, again, the compensation. With all due respect, we don't need a separate section that says we're going to pay the manager. That's really where the contract comes in. And then absence of the city manager, that's good standard clause. It just needs to be all compacted into one paragraph. And then again, a reference to city secretary, and we're going to update that to show that's
And I apologize, y'all have mine that I made notes on, so just ignore my notes.
There we go. We just combine these questions on there.
Gary, on these
To me, that looks like
departments,
it's just completely
oh, would it be better to list them than say may include but not limited to police department, fire department?
I think that might be a way, if we just want to have that in there, we're not doing away with it. Then I'm just saying that you don't need a chapter, an article, a section to give anybody the authority or that we're having police. But it never hurts to say the powers shall include but not limited to.
What if we
And
wanted
that would be a good
rebound
way
the
to do
public
that
safety
here.
department? You know, what if we went to triple certified
Well,
public
and-
safety department, we're no longer out of
That's also becoming very common in many parts of
line
Texas.
advocating for that.
But-
Nobody get nervous. It's fine.
Well, the idea is you want to make from my perspective, I want the council and the city manager through the council to have as much, I want to maximize their options for being able to change smoother and easier rather than more cumbersome. So rather than having to have your attorney or your advisor look at 4 different places to write a memo about what you have to do, just 1 or 2 places. You have enough on your mind without having to say, well, let me make sure you're meeting all 4 different requirements. So if you read through those, again, here the idea was just to be consistent, just to combine them all, make a reference to the department, make a reference to the chief being a hired department head being hired by the manager, and then if you want, we can include some of their specific duties and powers. But this could also just be consolidated into a paragraph saying there'll be such, it could be actually put in that one over here where there shall be such departments as the manager can take part of it, including but not limited to, subject to city council approval. You could have a one paragraph. It really says it better than these 2 or 3 different places.
For example.
No, I mean, well, I hate that I had to use that term.
It's valid.
Personally, I don't think that.
Somebody's gonna
But,
think that.
yeah, but I do think like just kind of nodding to it and saying like, we want this, but you have the ability to change it as necessary. Again, I like to know that council has to agree with you, so we've elected 5 people who are crazy enough to do something and they agree with the city manager, then that's on us, I guess, you know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
there's just so much here that is repetitive. I can't imagine, we're probably reading this entire document. I'm having deja vu.
There's a lot of similarities in Texas cities.
Referencing.
Those people keep making the same. early in my career, served in a city council, had a big election, and a slate of candidates ran on cleaning out City Hall. And 3 of them won, so every vote was 4-3. After about 4 months of our council meetings lasting hours, because the wonderful old insurance salesman mayor couldn't believe we couldn't just talk our way through anything. He got a piece of paper and he folded it like this. He set it on his desk and he went, 4 is greater than 3. And then he just put it out there for all of our council meetings after that. So I learned. Not fun for anybody involved, but sometimes 4 is greater than 3.
I think also for smaller cities, when they first hit that 5,000 threshold, so you've gone from only being able to do what is specifically enumerated in state law, to now being able to do anything that's not prohibited. So there may be this holdover of wanting to make sure that it's in there and that they've given, this power has been given and is enumerated, because you've gone from that mindset to this new one. So that's me jumping. That makes sense.
Yeah.
You know, when we stood up a fire department here, it was a big contentious deal, so I can see why that would be added into the charter, because it was very political and.
Yeah.
Yeah, file.
Are we to the end of?
Did we do Article 5?
Judicial, when you're gonna add all that attorney and court stuff. You might add
Oh,
all
yes,
together,
yes,
Article
yes.
5, I think.
Or let me, that's the rest of it. It's up here. Oh, here we go. Nope.
Here's my
You have an,
I have an Article
I'm
5.
sorry. I've managed
I will
to
give you mine.
mix up my papers.
If you'll just like ignore my
Okay.
markups there.
So I kind of I wanted to take apart and put back together the city attorney thing to kind of, I think it flows better. It's kind of interesting, that very last sentence in there, at the discretion of the council, the city attorney may appear at its meetings. That is interesting wording. So kind of makes it sound like, if I were your city attorney, I need to ask before I can. So I've never seen wording like that. But
Did I say that?
Expensive,
Yeah.
I understand. I do understand that. So there's nothing wrong with that, that the attorney serves at the pleasure, like has been said. So, and I took things apart and referenced them that there was one sentence that made it sound like the city attorney has to do this, and that's not for towns this size. It's the city attorney or the attorney, like the city attorney's not doing this charter review. So that was just a specific reminder that council can always hire more than one lawyer. There is only one city attorney with those responsibilities, but they can hire as many lawyers as they can. So.
And what's important, sometimes we have attorneys that represent us in lawsuits that are different than our city attorney, because it's covered for insurance.
Depending on who your insurance is, you have probably a contract with the county or somebody to do tax collection. That's a different law firm.
That stuff like this, because our city attorney is
Yes.
at city council meetings every Monday night, and he was available, and so we've got somebody else that can get us through these meetings.
Bond counsel.
Oh,
Bond counsel.
Law counsel, whenever you sell money, you have to bring in the out-of-town clients. So then we have 502, the municipal court. And the first part here was just taking a couple of these apart and putting them back together so that the meeting flowed a little better. That was the same way with the clerk of the municipal court reference. But then the judge of the municipal court, I added in there, the judge shall be an attorney licensed to practice in Texas. Is that wording already in there, or is the mayor acting as your judge?
Over here it's not.
Okay. So that I have that underlined, so that I think maybe that just was taken from another place.
I don't think our current judge is an attorney.
Well, you're as a home rule city, I would suggest be my.
Is he?
Is it just?
He's the JP. I don't think he's an attorney.
Don't have to be a lawyer to be a justice of the peace. But so maybe my bias, but as a home rule city and with the population you have and with the municipal court you have, I would suggest and recommend you hire a lawyer to be your municipal judge. There's lots of lawyers in East Texas that do part-time municipal judges, and that you also hire an alternate municipal court judge who is also a lawyer. Now, if you don't do that, your mayor will still have the authority to serve as the judge, but that's just not what I would recommend. You may, some towns have guys who are willing to do that, but and if you don't, sometimes if you don't have a problem, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But there could be a lot of issues if you have it on. So that's one you'd want to talk about with the mayor. If the mayor likes being the judge, then
He's not the judge right now. I don't think he wants to be the judge. I'm more worried that our current judge is not an attorney. I don't disagree with you.
Oh, okay.
We probably should move in that direction. But
yeah. Well, there's not a requirement, so you're not a court of record, which means all the trials you have in municipal court, whoever loses can just appeal to the county court of law. And so if you're like other cities in Texas that have non-courts of record, you're not making much, if any, money out of municipal court. I don't know. Of course, none of us want to admit that we make money from municipal court, but a municipal court in most Texas cities is a cash register because that's how people drive. Lots of traffic violations. And in order to be a court of record, you have to have a lawyer. That's the carrot the state put in. So that would be my recommendation.
On code and building standard issues, not being a court of record.
Yes, but so that's also a local political question. So if you're comfortable with the judge you have, and it may not be worth, it's working the way it is. Then the next item on the clerk of the municipal court will be, again, this one's just put together, and you already had that the city secretaries would step in for the clerk of the court as needed, I think. But I've added there a selected deputy so that you need to have that's kind of like a succession. There's always a existing city position that's designated as a municipal court.
This isn't so much background on scoreboard or stick.
I think, why can't it just say you're the chief human resource officer as well? That's what you're saying all the time, right, is, with the council's approval, you fire, who you see fit.
Yeah.
But the chart, no, I'm good.
Not even really with their approvals, not how we're doing it in practice now.
Well, we want to help match what we're doing and what we're comfortable with.
They're essentially approving by not disapproving.
I mean, they're kept informed, for sure,
Yeah.
when that happens, but.
Like I'm thinking,
So we just hired
similar
them.
superintendent contracts, how big the district is. some very small districts, the board approves all teacher hires. Bigger districts, in my previous district, the board didn't approve any hires. They gave him sole power to do whatever, hire, fire, without their, now we got their blessing. And then here, it's, principal and above. I would need to go to the board and ask for their approval, but to hire a teacher or a paraprofessional or custodian. So I just didn't know how that, why you have to outline every single head of department.
You don't have to, and
That's all.
again, I think it's not the best idea to do that, because you're kind of asking for trouble, either for somebody looking for trouble or for just not maybe doing that. So this is one of the areas where you do have the ability to just give that level. Really, the basic idea of council manager is, in the charter, you designate the employees, if any, there's got to be at least one, hired by the city council. And then typically in most Texas towns, city secretary or city clerk, the city attorney, the judge, and the city manager. But there are towns where the city secretary, even the city attorney, are literally hired by the city manager. Not many larger cities, but cities this size, they're still the same. Judges typically, again, once the city gets to a certain size, just you need the independence, and so you want the council to the judge, and the judge needs to be. But if you're not at that size yet, then it's not a problem.
I'm just curious. This is a lot of words to say.
Well, it is, because they were literally,
Creating.
and I think that maybe gets back to part of what you were saying, that there was kind of a mindset that we need to specifically say, we really want a police department. We want either a volunteer or a fire or paid, or both, but we want fire protection. We want, but now, once you get certain large enough, now we're modern enough that there's an expectation. You have people moving here that just expect you to do that. And so the expectations of the public, that drives government. And the comment, I think now might be a convenient time to just kind of do away with Article 5 and just, since the city attorney's office or the legal department, you don't have a legal department, so to speak, municipal court, it might be a convenient time to just put those under administration, which is, administration is all departments. Now, you do have a separate article about planning and zoning, but I don't know, that's such a, typically a large area, that's often a separate article. But we're kind of getting ahead of that, but that's where I'd like to talk, like there's a lot of emphasis in there to the comprehensive plan and stuff like that. So that's one where I would want to just, are y'all doing what that actually says?
Our comprehensive plan from 2005, that one.
That was for 2020.
Okay. Well, and so again, that's not unusual. It's just when you do a charter amendment, that's an opportunity to kind of say, we're not going to update our plan every 10 years. We're not even going to update it every 15. So just say, as needed.
$300,000.
It's
Just so you know, that's why it hasn't been done since 2005. Yeah.
I don't know how much money, can't even imagine.
Yeah. So we're working meeting agreement.
You're like,
That's why.
Well,
For a book.
good to know.
Right, that's a good stopping point for today's meeting.
So, document-wise, the goal would be, following this meeting, that I'll go through and update now Articles 1 through 5 with what we've talked about. And and send that to staff, and then they'll send that out to you. And then I'll do another document like this that's covering the next 1 or 2 articles we're going to talk about. And the goal is, I'm also working on the whole charter. So at some point, I'll be able to get like a rough draft of all the rest of the charter, send that to the staff, and then hopefully they can send that to you so you can, in your spare time, start reading through that. But the goal would be, before every meeting, you'll get just the articles we're going to talk about the next night, next meeting. And then after that, you get an update with the whole thing. And as we go through, I think it's not going to be unusual that we keep going back a little bit, because even the articles ahead of us are going to have references that we might want to move around. Or we might decide we don't need to say it up here and we're just going to say it more specifically down here.
Motion to adjourn.
All those in favor? Any opposed? Mayor would say stay here. Meeting is adjourned at 7:59.
Thank you all for your time. I know